Today in lab, we're going to be purifying our caffeine by subliming it. This is all the glassware that you're going to need to do the sublimation. We've got a subliming tube, a vacuum adapter, and then our thin wall vial. Once we've put all the pieces together, it should look like this. The first thing that we're going to do is make some ice water. And you can just use the regular water from the sink to do this. So our crude caffeine is going to be sort of stuck to the sides of our thin wall vial due to the evaporation of that dichloromethane. So what I'm doing here is just scraping it down so most of it is in the bottom of the vial. I'm using a pipette here, but probably a spatula would work better. I'm going to fill my sublimation tube with that ice water and use a long-tipped pasteur pipette to do this to make sure that the water gets all the way into your sublimation tube. Here you can see the level of the tube inside of my thin wall vial. And again, really make sure that your water is all the way down inside of that tube. To heat the caffeine for the sublimation, we're going to be using a Bunsen burner, so we'll hook that up to the gas outlet. We'll also be using the vacuum, so here you can see that set up, and that's going to just hook into our sublimation apparatus. So now I'm ready to start the sublimation, so I'm going to get my Bunsen burner going, and I'm just going to gently heat that crude caffeine. Now the process here is I'm going to heat that caffeine, it's going to sublime, it's going to go from solid phase to gaseous phase, and then it will recondense, it will deposit itself onto the cold sublimation tube. During this process, you can actually observe the caffeine subliming and going from the solid phase into the gaseous phase. You'll know when the sublimation is done because you won't have any more crude caffeine in the bottom of your vial. In order to isolate your crude caffeine, the first thing you'll want to do is to remove the water from your sublimation tube. Once you've removed the water, there's really two ways you can go about getting to your pure caffeine. The first is you can simply just remove the tube all the way through your entire apparatus. Or the second is you can remove the thin wall vial, and that's maybe a little bit safer. Either way, the next thing you want to do is to scrape your pure caffeine onto a watch glass. The last thing we'll be doing today is getting a melting point of our purified caffeine. To do this, we'll take a capillary tube and we'll load it up with some pure caffeine. In order to get the caffeine to go from the top of the tube down to the bottom, all we're going to do is simply drop it through this tube. As we drop it into the tube, it will literally bounce on the countertop, it won't break, and the caffeine will be pushed to the bottom of the tube. Now we're going to want to seal the end of the capillary tube so that the caffeine does not sublime out of the capillary tube itself. To do that, we can just use our Bunsen burner again and melt the end of the capillary tube in the flame. Now that our tube is sealed, we can go ahead and take the melting point. So back here you can see the melting point apparatus. You're going to load your capillary tube into the top, and the instructions for how to use these melting point instruments are located right up here. For cleanup today, it's actually pretty straightforward. Your thin wall vial, we're just going to collect and clean those for you. Your purified caffeine, we're also going to collect in a special caffeine collection vial. Your capillary tubes, those can just go into the glass waste. And then your sublimation apparatus, you can just rinse with acetone, and that should be totally sufficient.